Hey everybody, it's Sam with Wrestling Overtime. And if you listen to the news and updates episode for July 7th, 2020, at the very end, I told you we were going to be doing some new things, that I wanted to try out a new episode segment. And this is the first one of them. As you saw in the episode title, I'm calling this right now a look back. And what we're going to be doing is picking out different wrestlers that I've heard of or you have heard of and doing a little bit of research on them. Whether it be, research dragging through podcasts or looking up things on the internet or watching stuff on the WWE Network or searching YouTube or something, trying to figure out the history of wrestling. I hear so many people say that are older than me, all wrestling used to be better, in the 70s. It used to be better in the 80s when Hulk Hogan was around. It used to be better, in the 90s when Rock and Roll Express was running around. Used to be better, in the late 90s when the Attitude Era come. Well, no, it was the Ruthless Aggression Era. And I just kind of don't remember people, or they were before my time. And so I would kind of like to go back and explore them. Now, we're getting some of that with the Dark Side of the Ring. The Dark Side of the Ring, those 2 seasons have been unbelievable. There have been a lot of wrestlers that I never heard of, or I had heard their names, but I had no clue of their stories. And so that gave me a little bit of an inkling, hey, do that. But like I said on the news and updates episode, especially hearing that A&E is going to be doing some biographies of some of the wrestlers, it made me want to do a look back. And this episode, we're going to look back on Vivian Vachon. Now, I have heard her last name pronounced, I guess, about 3 different ways. I have heard it pronounced, like I said, Vachon. I have heard it pronounced Vachon. And I think I'm going to go with Vachon. She was born in January 23rd in 1951 as Diane Vachon. Now, even though she was born in Vermont, her family, I guess, moved to Canada near the Montreal area. She was the baby of the family. They had 13 children, and they became a famous wrestling family and were known throughout the United States and Canada. They became French Canadian. A lot of times they had accents, and they wrestled throughout Canada and the United States, and some in Japan. Like I said, Vivian was the baby, but the 2, seems like stars of the Vachon family were Maurice, my dog, Vachon, and then her brother, Paul, the Butcher Vachon. Now, some of you may remember her, my dog, Maurice, adopted a child, and she was Luna Vachon. And you may remember her a little bit. But I got, I guess, interested in Vivian and her career when some friends of mine were talking about the fabulous Moolah and all the different stories that they had heard about her throughout the territory days, throughout her days with WWE. And I look forward to one day sitting down and doing that research. It's not going to be right now. Just because Fabulous Moolah's career spanned so many years, and there are so many stories. But when they were talking, they're older than me, and they are very knowledgeable about the Fabulous Moolah's career. Vivian Vachon was actually brought up, and they didn't know a whole lot about her, but it was enough to intrigue me to do a little bit of research. And like I said, Maurice and Paul were wrestlers. They were her older brothers. They were big in AWA and NWA. And because of that, Vince McMahon does own a lot of the films, and you can see them on the WWE Network. If you type in Vachon, it will pull up a lot of the Vachon family wrestling matches, interviews. There was a segment on there where they have, I think it's a 15-minute clip of Paul being involved in a wedding angle that they did. Some of them are really good. The only thing that I could really find, and like I said, I did this kind of quickly on the WWE Network, is there is a Madison Square Garden episode, but it's a match. It's in Madison Square Garden in 1977. And so you get to see a little bit of Vivian there. Many that you talk to, or if you go back and read the magazines that were back then, the wrestling sheets, Vivian Vachon was considered by a lot of people to be one of the best wrestlers in the 1970s. And that was, I don't know, shocking to me to be at the top of her game and considered one of the best wrestlers in, a decade, but I had never heard of her. And granted, I don't know my wrestling history back then real well, but you would think top wrestlers in each era you would have heard of. I mean, I never got to see Bruno Sammartino. I got to see him, in the later days of Saturday Night Main Event. He would come on and thank people, raise his hand or whatever, but I never saw him wrestle, but at least I know him from reading things. So, Vivian decided to leave high school in the 10th grade. And from what I was able to dig up, it was rumored that she tried to be a model and actually attended charm school at one point. Now, while she was wrestling toward the end of her career before she retired, it was said that she was a very good singer, and I found that she actually released some French singles that were in Canada. However, I couldn't find, if they hit the charts or anything. And I don't even know any of the names to see if they're, out there on the internet, if there's some kind of recording to hear if she had a beautiful voice, although there are some accounts, that she did. However, it was said that in the late 1960s, she ended up having her first match as a teenager. Her brother Maurice had decided about a year and a half before to start training her in wrestling. And she had a match, and her brothers then decided that she had talent, that she had some really nice natural ability, and they felt like she could actually make some money as a wrestler. And of course, with her family being in wrestling, it just seemed to Vivian to be something, hey, this is what I should do. So Maurice talked her into it and suggested that she go down to South Carolina and start training with Mary Ellison. Now, for those of you who don't know Mary Ellison, oh, yes, you do. Because Mary Ellison is the fabulous Moolah. So Maurice talked her into going to South Carolina to get trained by Moolah. And she actually lived on Moolah's, for lack of a better word, compound, in some of her houses, trained in what at first started to be her barn, where she had built a wrestling ring. And Vivian, I couldn't find anything that said she did or did not like that. However, I did find that while she was there, she did end up dating one of Moolah's nephews. And I read two different articles that had two different views. One said, Moolah introduced them and was fine with it. And then one article stated that Moolah was very upset about it and did not want her trainees to be dating anyone in her family or have anything to do with them other than, just be friendly with them and everything. So that kind of starts what is a running thread that is almost concealed in a lot of articles that I read and internet research that I did, was that Moolah just seemed to be behind a lot of different things. And whether that's true or not, I don't know. Had you asked me 10 years ago, I would have said, oh no. But in the last 10 years, a lot of people have come forward with stories that are not so flattering of the fabulous Moolah. And so it makes me wonder, was, Moolah happy with Vivian and trained her well, or did she see her as a rival and kind of wanted to hold her back? Because Vivian was said to be 5'7" and 145 pounds. She was a curvy blonde, and she played a heel a lot of times, which threw people when they attended matches or saw her, because they were expecting this beautiful, tall, curvy blonde to be the babyface, to be, strutting around and using her wiles on people. When she wasn't. She was a heel, talking to the audience, talking to her competitor and everything. In February of 1971, which she would have been 20 years old, she became the California Women's Champion. And then later, in November of 1971, she became the AWA Women's Champion. And remember, her brothers were longtime veterans of AWA. So I think they probably took care of her, and a lot of people in that promotion saw her as, a star. She's 20 years old, and she was described as many of being a natural, and that she was willing to work like a man, that she was willing to travel the circuit and perform night after night, and take on some rough matches. She was also described as having a unusual combination of technique, and I'm sure that was from her brother's training and Moolah's training, of strength and of athleticism that many just didn't have. Back then, if you watch any of the older matches, a lot of times there were a lot of hair pulling, slapping, almost clawing done in women's wrestling. A lot of hair pulling that ended up them throwing them out of the ring and things like that. But it seems like Vivian, with her athleticism and her training, actually did a lot of moves and, different techniques. And so, I read a couple articles where there seemed to be a start in 72, 73 that Vivian might actually start taking over on the women's circuit and being the star of a lot of the different women's circuits. And people were talking about her unseating Moolah. However, that didn't happen. And I looked and looked and looked and couldn't find out why. Like I said, a lot of articles, there's a thread there where they kind of mention her, going up against Moolah, or her, possibly being in line to take over for Moolah. But then it's like all of a sudden it just kind of disappears. So it just makes me wonder what was going on backstage then. In all these different promotions, did she try to have, hey, I'm going to be in this promotion and I'm going to be a star in this promotion? Or did she try to go the circuit and Moolah smacked her down? What exactly went on? I wish, someone would let the cat out of the bag as far as that one goes. But the official reason was that in her mid-20s, all of a sudden, Vivian's physical style put a stop to her wrestling. And there's even a statement she said where she needed to retire in hopes of starting a family. So that was just, I don't know, a little strange to me. And she did. She ended up getting married. Her first husband and her could not conceive a child. They ended up having some issues and got a divorce. And soon thereafter, she married her second husband, where she had children with him. Now, she wrestled again on a Japanese tour in the early 1980s. I couldn't find the exact year. And then she ended up going back to Japan on Maurice's retirement tour in 1986. But the articles and comments that I read about her on the 1986 Japanese tour was that she appeared to be well past her physical peak. Well, think about it. She was 35 years old, and they're saying she's well past her physical peak. that just kind of hit me. Because when you think about it, look at Shayna Baszler. Shayna Baszler is older than 35 years old. She's getting ready to turn 40. And look at the peak physical condition that Shayna Baszler is in. And I know you really can't compare different generations, but unfortunately I am going to do that just a little bit to show you how different women's wrestling is. Vivian, while she was not in wrestling very long, she had about 217 matches that WrestlingData.com could find. Now, WrestlingData.com is the place you want to go. They keep track of as many wrestlers as they possibly can, their matches, who they took on, who they were against, who they tagged with, whether they won or they lost, or they tied, or they were disqualified, or whatever. So they have her down for 217 matches, and she had 92 wins and 52 losses. Well, as I was looking at those stats, I thought, I had this sneaking suspicion that Moolah was running a lot of the different promotions, especially the women's part of it. And I thought, I'm going to look up her record against the fabulous Moolah. They are describing her as one of the most talented wrestlers of that era and possibly one of the best women's wrestlers in the 1970s. And so on WrestlingData.com, I looked up, and against Moolah, Vivian had 1 win, 1 draw, and 12 defeats. She was 1-12 against Moolah. Well, isn't that interesting? I mean, like I said, Fabulous Moolah ran a lot of the women's divisions in a lot of different promotions. And people were saying that Vivian might take over for Moolah, yet when Moolah is booking their matches, she's 1-12. I don't know about you, but I keep thinking where there's smoke, there's gotta be some fire. So I hope that, like I said, somebody tells us about this. But I want to show you how women's wrestling has changed. So what I did is just pick out some wrestlers that were in their 20s and show you how much women's wrestling has changed. So the first one that just popped in my mind was Sasha Banks. Sasha Banks is 28 years old. She didn't start right at 18, so she's got probably around about the same length of career that Vivian had. And Sasha Banks has wrestled 835 matches. Now remember, I said Vivian wrestled 217. Sasha has wrestled 835 matches, and her record, for those of you who are interested, because I know a lot of you are going to be like, well, tell me her wins and losses. Well, she has 483 wins and 339 losses. So what I wanted to do is, because I'm not exactly sure what age she retired, I wanted to pick a little bit younger wrestler. And if you guys have listened to the episodes in the past, you know who I picked. I decided to pick Tessa Blanchard, who a lot of people think has a very strong career. Yes, I know all of the allegations that were against her in January. Yes, I know she just got fired from Impact Wrestling. We're not talking about Tessa Blanchard. We're talking about the number of matches. So I looked her up, and Tessa, who is 24 years old, she'll be 25 later this month in July, but she's 24 years old and has been wrestling about 6 years. She has 361 matches already. And for those of you who want to know her record, she's 221 wins and 137 losses. And so even though Tessa hasn't been in a big promotion until she signed with Impact, she still has a lot more matches than what Vivian did in the 70s. And so then, just as she was retiring, Vivian starred in a movie, and that movie's name is Wrestling Queen. You can find it on YouTube, and it's about 80-90 minutes long. It's actually a semi-documentary about Vivian. Now, a lot of the movie contains, some about her brothers, some about her life growing up and everything. But you can see her in this. You can see her charisma. You can see her talent. I mean, it's there. If Vivian would walk in to WWE, AEW, Impact, Ring of Honor, New Japan, right now, they would be able to see that and say, hey, we can work with that. I encourage any of you that haven't seen Wrestling Queen and you want to see a very good documentary, because it's a pretty good movie. Sit down and actually watch that and kind of take it with a grain of salt because it's in the 1970s, but also kind of look at her with an eye of what she could be now if she would walk in right now. Because the problem is she can't walk in right now. Vivian passed away in August of 1991 at the age of 40 years old. And I think that in and of itself is tragic, but also how she passed away was very tragic. She was driving with her 9-year-old daughter, Julie, and they were driving along on a road and were hit by a drunk driver who ended up running a stop sign and T-boned them. And neither one of them lived. So that also got me interested in doing this, her life, her career, her story, as the first look back, because what could have been, and that's what I wanted to kind of stress, is what could have been. She was only 40 years old. What if she would have gotten back in the wrestling business? Not maybe as a wrestler, but as a promoter, as someone in creative, as someone, in promotions. She died in 1991. And had that been something that she wanted to do, it was very likely that she could have gotten a place at WWE, at WCW, at ECW. Like I said, Luna Vachon worked in ECW. If you go on the WWE Network, you will see her working with Tommy Dreamer. you will see a lot of different vignettes and skits that she did. You'll see some wrestling matches. Vivian's brother, Maurice and Paul, like I said, are on the WWE Network. Maurice and Luna actually have been inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame. And were given speeches. And I thought, man, what if Vivian would have taken a different road? What if Moolah would have let her be? What if, Moolah was in the South and Vivian went to the West Coast or went to Canada and became her own superstar? Would we have inducted her in the WWE Hall of Fame? Would we all know her name? If she had lived that car crash in 1991, would she have become a producer? Would she become a promoter? Would she become creative? Would she have went when Luna went to ECW? Would Vivian have clicked with Paul Heyman? Would Paul Heyman have brought her along and had her doing different stories in women's wrestling? What if she would have gotten hooked up with Dixie Carter? It was said that she was smart, she was very talented. What would have happened? And, sometimes you have to sit down and play what if, and then other times you have to say what if doesn't exist. But I think with this particular lady, I want to know more about her. I would like to know if she truly left to start a family, or was she pushed out? Did she get tired of the bureaucratic red tape, fighting against the system? What would have been? So, if you know any more about Vivian Vachon, and you know any stories about her or information, or you can give me websites or matches or anything like that, write me at wrestlingovertime@gmail.com. I would love to hear some stories. I would love to see some matches. If anybody knows of places where they're at, especially when she was over in Japan, I don't know, unless they're on YouTube, I don't really know how to get Japanese matches, especially from, back in the 70s and 80s. So if any of you know or know of a website, feel free to pass that on. As always, I want to tell you that we are on Twitter and Facebook. I have a Facebook page, Wrestling Overtime, where I post a lot of different live shows as far as Wrestling Zone. I post Fightful ones, post a lot of different news stories from a lot of different news breakers and stories from Ringside or Fightful or Sportskeeda or whatever. So feel free to drop by and talk about those. Hit me up on Twitter. Like I said, we're at Wrestling Overtime. I retweet a lot of stuff. I make comments on a lot of stuff. So feel free to hit me up. But if you have any matches or any sites that you think that I need to be aware of, or like I said, if you just have any stories, whether they're rumors or not, I would love to hear them. Write me at wrestlingovertime@gmail.com, because I really am interested in the history of wrestling. But we're going to be doing these from time to time. Look backs on different wrestlers or characters in the world of the wrestling universe. So if you have anybody you would like for me to tell a little bit of the story of, then feel free to also tweet me or hit me up on Facebook or email me and let me know who you want to hear about. I know one that I want to explore. I have always heard about Gorgeous George. And as far as I know, I don't think I saw any of his matches. But I've heard all kinds of stories. So I can't wait to research him. I don't know if he's going to be next or not, but I cannot wait to research him. So if there's anybody else out there that you've heard of that's interesting or is one of the best wrestlers or could have been one of the best wrestlers, please let me know, because you know that I am working overtime for you. So I will talk to you guys soon.